Well, folks, I think Saagar Enjeti really did it this time, to the point where even Breaking Point's viewers in the comment section of this video are really going after Saagar. And I've never seen this before with Breaking Points. A lot of times the comments tend to attack Crystal or disagree with Crystal, but this time they're really coming after Saagar, and with good reason. I told you a couple of days ago about Ta-Nehisi Coates. He was a guest on CBS this morning talking about his new book, The Message, where he discusses Israel as an apartheid state and what he experienced when he went to Israel following a Palestinian family. And there was a lot of pressure from one of the hosts on the show, Tony Dukapil, who was pushing back and saying, oh, it just sounds like you're bashing Israel, etc. I told you a little bit about Tony, and I showed you that Tony has two of his kids that live in Israel. And so just keep that in mind when you watch that full interview. But Ta-Nehisi Coates said, as a product of Jim Crow, why should I support an apartheid state? Either we're against apartheid or we're not. And I agree with Ta-Nehisi Coates about that. Well, apparently, Saagar Enjeti had some pretty cringe comments to say about that appearance. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here, and hold on to your horses, because we're going to have to roast him for this one.
Part of what his book doesn't say, he's an excellent writer. It's well written. It's, extraordinarily provocative, not provocative, but evocative in terms of taking you into the life of a Palestinian, living in Israel or living in the occupied territories. So it's important, but it's not really new ground. What makes it incredibly important is because of who he is and the fact that he's allowed into these rooms. So that was the opening question out of the gate. I have another clip that I'm going to show you, which is basically the rest of the interview. Also, these formats of like 5-minute interviews are so absurd. Ridiculous. But I want to get your reaction to that before we move on to the second piece. I just thought it was wild.
That's a wild thing to say. As I literally said, I don't like Ta-Nehisi Coates. I genuinely I think he might be the godfather of a lot of the race problems that we have today. That's not an exaggeration in terms of that essay, The Case for Reparations, single-handedly radicalized every white girl on a college campus who eventually ended up working at the New York Times.
Pause. So I don't care if you like Ta-Nehisi Coates or not. I don't even know the dude. So I don't care if you like him or agree or disagree. That's not the point. For Saagar Enjeti to sit there and to say that he blames Ta-Nehisi Coates for racism in this country, not the institutions that exist, not the criminal justice system, not the policing system, not the education system, not redlining, not real estate discrimination, none of those things, but Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's all his fault, according to Saagar Enjeti. He also seems to be very frustrated by the fact that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote this paper about the case for reparations, and Saagar, that bothers him for some reason. And what's interesting about this is that I don't see Saagar making the same statement about any other group that received reparations in this country. I don't see him making this statement about Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps and their descendants that received cash reparations and their descendants. I don't see him making that argument. I don't see Saagar Enjeti making this argument about Holocaust survivors who have received reparations. And again, both of those groups deserve repair. Both of those groups deserve reparations. But for some reason, whenever the topic is, American descendants of slavery receiving reparations, Saagar has a problem with that. He only has a problem with us getting it or even discussing it. It's a problem. Saagar is mad at Ta-Nehisi Coates because he feels like Ta-Nehisi Coates is the reason why white liberal women on college campuses became woke. Why is Saagar so concerned about what white women did? Well, why do you care? Why are you focused on that? What? Let's go on. We'll go back just a little bit because I cut him off a little
That's a wild thing to say. As I literally said, I don't like Ta-Nehisi Coates. I genuinely blame. I think he might be the godfather of a lot of the race problems that we have today. That's not an exaggeration in terms of that essay, The Case for Reparations, single-handedly radicalized every white girl on a college campus who eventually ended up working at the New York Times, behest of the BLM movement, of all this other nonsense that we have today. So I really do find him a villain in American politics.
Pause. So he considers BLM nonsense. So again, with BLM, there's two different groups here. There's BLM Global Network. That's the one that profited off of these police killings, etc. But that was the second group. The original BLM was a grassroots movement. In fact, Cornel West's running mate was one of the founders of that movement. I've interviewed her on the show about that. So these are two different things. So when people just say BLM, I'm like, which one are you talking about, right? But he's like, that nonsense. But when Saagar says nonsense, he's not referring to the capital that came along with BLM Global Network. He just thinks talking about race in general, and particularly for Black people, it just seems to bother Saagar for some reason. He seems to see that this is a problem. And see, I point to people like Saagar because I want to make a point. People will point to Saagar Enjeti and they'll see us all in one group. If we worked at the same company or we worked in the same office, we're the people of color. But Saagar Enjeti would never try to align himself with someone like me. He wouldn't align himself with the Black coworkers. He would align himself with the white coworkers. And I've said this before about Saagar Enjeti, that he is anti-Black. For people who don't understand what that means, let me make that very clear. Almost everything that he has to say about Black people, particularly in this country, whenever we talk about struggle, whenever we talk about oppression, racism, etc., he's always negative about it or against it. That is being anti-Black. I don't see him push back against other groups in this way. And so for people to come and people will say, well, he's a conservative. Yeah, I know white people who are conservative that aren't like this. That's an excuse. Saagar Enjeti made a decision a long time ago, and he decided, like many people who were in his position, that they would try to align themselves closer to whiteness because that is what is going to benefit them in the long run. I've told people this before, and friends of mine have explained this very well. What people have to understand, when people immigrate to this country, whether they are a person of color or not, their goal is to achieve the American dream. Now, some of you guys are like, well, we're all trying to do that. Yeah, but let me get there. We're going to get there. Their goal is to achieve the American dream when they come here. And to them, the best way of doing that is to look and see who is doing well in this country. And people are told this before they even get here. That's what people have to understand. I know my friend told me all of it, revealed it all to me. So I know. So when they come, they see who's doing the best here, white Americans. So in order to achieve the American dream, they see that they need to align themselves with the group that is doing the best economically in this country. So that's what they strive to do. They're not trying to align with us. Now, you don't have to align with us, but to say that our struggle or talking about race and what we've experienced in this country is nonsense and is ridiculous. Yeah, you sound anti-Black to me, Saagar. And I don't need to listen to Ta-Nehisi Coates to point that out. It's your rhetoric. The same rhetoric that he had during the George Floyd protest. And I honestly don't understand how Crystal can just sit right there next to him knowing he has these views. It just like that to me is just mind-boggling. So let me ask you a question. And if you look up his background, you would see, has Saagar Enjeti been in a position in this country where he's had to struggle financially? Does he come from a lower income family? Does he come from a poor family? No. So he is already a step ahead of a lot of you when he came here because his family was in a class that yours was not. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So he already has that going for him. Let's continue.
That said, I don't even like him, and I would not open with a question like that because that's wild. It would be an interrogation of the book itself, and not to say something like that would belong. What did he say? In an extremist
The backpack of an extremist.
That's an insane thing to say, and especially considering that that guy didn't disclose a lot of his own biases whenever it comes to Israel. So that's another problem I think that was going into that. What, do you want to listen to the rest of it?
Yeah. I mean,
let me answer this for a second. I understand that he was born in the U.S., but his family immigrated here. So what I am saying is that oftentimes when they come here, in particular, depending on what caste system his family is from, they are already a step ahead of a lot of us. I said the same thing about Vivek Ramaswamy. This is what a lot of people don't understand. Vivek Ramaswamy went around telling the country that his parents came here with nothing. That was a lie. His parents came here with college degrees, and his parents came here with enough money to be able to get housing. Some of you can't get housing. Some of you living with other people because you can't afford to get housing. So think about that for a second. And I hear a lot of people make this statement. My parents came here with nothing. No, a lot of these people's parents came here with college degrees. So they were already ahead of you.
and I just want to respond a little bit to
Sure, go on. Yeah,
I mean, I disagree with the race pessimist view, but I don't know, to be so like call him a villain and evil and like causing every racial problem in America is crazy.
Oh, hold on it.
That essay was the godfather of the anti-racist movement.
I mean, he's allowed to have a perspective and write what he wants. That doesn't make him a villain.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And to acknowledge the racism in America and that this.
Let's pause. So Crystal told him that this doesn't make him a villain. She said that Ta-Nehisi Coates can write about whatever he wants. That doesn't make him a villain. Saagar Enjeti goes, yes, it does. I thought Saagar Enjeti was for free speech. I thought that was supposed to be, isn't that like a thing? Like, I don't understand this. Yes, it does. It does make him a villain. It makes him a villain because he's writing about his experiences. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a black man. Like, don't get it twisted. Yes, he is a part of a certain class that I'm not a part of. Yes, he is very well known. He can rub elbows with people in circles that I would never be in the same room with. Yes. But at the end of the day, Ta-Nehisi Coates is still a black man. And his experience living in this country is going to be different than Saagar's experience. Saagar seems to have a problem admitting that. This doesn't make this guy evil, man. Ay, ay, ay.
This continues to be a legacy that matters today. There's not that's a noble thing to do. So the fact he comes to a different conclusion than you or I, of course that's noble. No. That he comes to a different conclusion than you or I don't know, you're villainizing him in a way that's not that different from the way Tony DeCoppel is here on CBS.
I would say to his face, and I also wouldn't call him an extremist. I would say, I think your case for reparations was the reason that we have all this DEI bullshit, and that you effectively radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that racism is the single biggest problem in American life.
Pause. So let me tell you where the DEI stuff came from. Jesus Christ. When I was working at Boston University, that was when George Floyd was murdered, right? So that was also during the pandemic and all that stuff. I know we don't want to do a flashback, but sometimes we got to go back there. And we had the lockdown. So it was a very tough time. It was after the George Floyd protest. That was when Boston University, the president of BU, and it was actually Ibram Kendi, and I've talked about Professor Kendi on the show before. And look, I've had criticisms for Professor Kendi. That was when they got together and they decided that they were going to host this summit. It was a webinar university-wide, and that was when they started implementing the diversity and inclusion offices more rapidly throughout the university. However, prior to George Floyd, we already had an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion that already existed prior to Ta-Nehisi Coates' reparations essay and prior to the murder of George Floyd. However, after George Floyd, they did increase those positions throughout the campus. So this is something I think, again, Saagar has been doing this show for quite some time. Like, and before Breaking Points, Crystal and Saagar were on the Hill Rising. So Saagar hasn't been, I guess we would particularly say, in the regular, like, day-to-day work environment for quite some time. But diversity, equity, inclusion offices already existed prior to George Floyd. So I want to be very clear about that.
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Over,
yes.
Police that murdered George Floyd, over Donald Trump and all of his many provocations. I mean, I just think that to lay the blame at the feet of one person is sort of insane.
Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations, again, is what radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that burning the country down because a single cop murdered George Floyd.
Why do you care? Like, why does he seem to be bothered by the fact that it was white people who were radicalized? Like, why does he keep saying white people were radicalized? Some people say that they were radicalized after Bernie 2016. I didn't see, Saagar pointing fingers at people that were supporting Bernie. I mean, they talked about Bernie often on the Hill Rising when Crystal and Saagar were on Rising. So I just don't, why does he keep bringing up it? Am I alone? Am I alone here? Ancient Crustacean said, it's so weird. It is weird. Why do you keep bringing up white people became radicalized? Why does that bother you? Why do you care?
Was a good idea. Or for everybody to start quoting Martin Luther King.
Oh, hold on. We got to come back to that part. Hold on. We're going to come back to the
all of his many provocations. I mean, I just think that to lay the blame at the feet of one person is sort of insane.
Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations, again, is what radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that burning the country down because a single cop murdered George Floyd was a good idea. Or for everybody to start quoting Martin Luther King.
Quoting Martin Luther King. I don't know why it stops there. Sorry.
Burning the country down because a single cop murdered George Floyd was a good idea. Or for everybody to start quoting Martin Luther King.
Quoting Martin Luther King. Let me close one of the tabs so that'll stop buffering. Everybody started quoting Martin Luther King according to Saagar Enjeti. Let's see if we can. Oh boy, quoting Martin Luther King. Sorry, let's go back. Let me see if I can get it now. Okay, because I got a point with the Martin Luther King thing.
You're on CBS.
I would say to his face, and I also wouldn't call him an extremist. I would say I think your case for reparations was the reason that we have all this DEI bullshit, and that you effectively radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that racism is the single biggest problem in American life.
So you would blame Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Over, police that murdered George Floyd, over Donald Trump and all of his many provocations. I mean, I just think that to lay the blame at the feet of one person is sort of insane.
Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations, again, is what radicalized a bunch of white liberals into thinking that burning the country down because a single cop murdered George Floyd was a good idea. Or for everybody to start quoting Martin Luther King.
Okay, quoting Martin Luther King. Newsflash, people were quoting Martin Luther King way before Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote that essay about the case for reparations. People have been quoting Dr. King since I was a kid. Ever since I was a kid, people were quoting Dr. King. That's not something that people just started doing. So what kind of a bubble has Saagar Enjeti been living in? What kind of bubble did you live in that you just now realized that people were quoting Dr. King during the George Floyd protests? People have been quoting Dr. King and Malcolm X and Fred Hampton for years. But the problem is, Saagar, you are in a bubble. You're in a bubble with people like you. You're not breaking out of that bubble to talk to people who are that way. And what's really, really interesting to me is, like I said, this is one of the things that I say was a failure of the progressive movement, right? So I supported Bernie Sanders, really thought we had a chance there, and I still agree with those policies. But one of the failures of the progressive movement was this idea that you were just supposed to eliminate race. And that's funny because those same people, those same commentators are now, constantly talking about what's happening to the Palestinians. We got to look out for the Palestinian people, which I talk about as well. But the difference between me and them is that even when it wasn't about the Palestinians and the genocide, I was also talking about what needs to happen for Black people in this country. What is happening to women in certain places? What's happening to, and I think that was the big difference. So what I noticed about the progressive movement, it seemed like to me, the moment that you would bring up issues that pertain to the Black community, that was a problem. Don't talk about that. Just focus on class. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if we just focus on class, then we would miss what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people. If we just focused on class, we would miss all the rhetoric that has come from Israel, how they call the Palestinian people animals and savages and the occupation and the oppression, if we just focused on class and we didn't focus on the goal of ethnic cleansing. So that's one of the failures of that Bernie movement. And I did, even back then, I said, Bernie probably should have had a reparations plan. Nina Turner told him that. She was part of the campaign. She told him the same thing. Probably should have had that. Probably could have won more Black voters if you had a Black agenda. So the reality is, yes, is class an issue? Absolutely. But there is also issues with race in this country and in other countries, and that cannot be ignored. And Saagar, what he's telling you, the problems that he has with Ta-Nehisi Coates, what he's basically trying to tell you is he don't want to hear about it. He doesn't want to hear about Black struggle. He don't want to hear about the racial issues. He doesn't want to hear about it. Now you sit on a show with Crystal, and you guys talk about what's happening to the Palestinian people almost every day since October 7th, as have a lot of us. Now, you can sit there and you can listen about what's happening to the Palestinian people, but you can't sit there and listen to what's happening to Black people in this country. And that's why I call you anti-Black. I think there is one more piece here. It sit to that part, sorry.
Let's go ahead and move on to the rest of this interview, because this is also quite extraordinary, because
I think that is the end of that part. Yeah, it's bad. But the comments. So I looked at the comments, guys. I actually did it. I usually don't, but I did this time. And I haven't sorted this at all. Saagar saying a Black author complaining about racism is single-handedly responsible for the race problems we are having today is probably single most stupid comment anyone has ever made. That comment has over 220 likes. Next comment. Is Saagar auditioning for Fox News because his take on this is outlandish, blaming Coates for everything wrong with the current race relations, but ignoring the state of affairs in Israel is wild? That has over 107 likes. Sometimes I get caught up thinking Saagar is an okay guy, and then he reminds me he's a straight up racist, misogynist. My mistake. That has over 121 likes. Saagar literally did not respond to a single thing about what Coates was saying, nor any of Crystal's actual questions. He just repeatedly touted the same prepared Coates is a villain sentence over and over. Talk about being reactionary for the sake of being reactionary without any intellectual contribution. Saagar is a perfect example of a lack of self-awareness. This dude has benefited tremendously off the backs of the civil rights movement. What an idiot. That's another point there too, that Saagar doesn't understand. That without the civil rights movement, your family doesn't get to come here. Doesn't understand that. Saagar really believe a Black man is to blame for systemic racism in America. That has over 464 likes. Saagar is a villain for blaming a black man for speaking against the oppression of his people instead of sympathizing and placing the blame with the perpetrators of that racism. Over 205 likes. And then we'll go with this one as well. Like I said, I did not sort these comments. People like Saagar is one of the main reasons we can't get past the situation we are in today on so many levels. I applaud anyone who has the ability to sit next to him and try to have a fair and rational conversation. I couldn't do it. After what came out of his mouth during this segment and the way it came out, I feel the same way about him that he feels about Coates and then some. This is why it was important for me to come into the space, and my comrades over at Revolutionary Blackout Network, those of us that were a part of the Bernie movement, but we didn't have shows during that time, is because we did feel like there was a certain voices that were missing from this space, and it was being misrepresented primarily by white commentators in the space. But that was a bad look.